They say I was born during the longest night of that winter, the night when the fire almost died. The flames were weak. The wind screamed against the hide walls. Men whispered about omens and cursed stars. Wolves howled too close to the edge of camp, and somewhere, deep in the forest, something older than fear was moving through the snow. That was the night I entered the world, and the night she left it. They don't speak her name, not because they've forgotten, because they remember too well. I was raised under silence, not the peaceful kind that comes after the hunt when meat roasts and bones crack with laughter. No, the kind of silence that surrounds a wound that never closes, the kind that grows heavier the longer no one speaks about it. That silence was my cradle. My earliest memory is of cold hands wrapping furs around me, tucking them tight beneath my chin. I don't remember the face, just the hands. They weren't my father's. His hands were calloused, rough, stained red. These were gentle, but urgent. They moved like someone trying to protect a flame from the wind. When I asked my father about her, he would grunt and walk away. When I asked the other women of the tribe, they gave me meat, smiles, or warnings, but never answers. She was strong, one of the elders once said, eyes on the fire, not on me. That's all you need to know. But that wasn't all I needed to know. Because from the moment I could stand, I felt the hole. It wasn't physical, it wasn't hunger, it was something else. Something missing from my blood, a name I couldn't speak, a memory that wasn't mine, but still lived in me. I learned early to fight, to track, to kill. Not because I wanted to, because it was the only way to quiet the whispers. I was the boy without a mother, the one who had to prove twice as much to be half as trusted. My father was the tribe's best hunter. His name brought silence and counsel. His voice carried weight, but he never once called me son, not with warmth, only as command, only when blood was needed. You don't get to be soft, he once told me. She already took that luxury from you. I didn't understand. What had she taken? She died giving me life. Wasn't that enough? The first time I killed, I was 11 winters. A stag. Not old, not weak, a proud one. Alone. I stalked him for 3 days through the black trees and frozen streams. I waited until he drank from the river under moonlight. And when the moment came, I didn't hesitate. The spear flew straight. He fell hard. The tribe feasted. They sang. My father clapped my shoulder. But I didn't feel pride. I felt emptiness. That night, as the others slept, I crept back to the place where the stag had died. I knelt by the blood-stained snow and placed my hand on the earth. "I'm sorry," I whispered. And in that moment, I felt something move in the wind, soft, fleeting, like a breath brushing my cheek. I don't know why, but I thought of her, the woman whose face I had never seen. I used to imagine what she looked like. In my dreams, she had wild hair and a voice like falling rain. She wore bone necklaces and painted moons on her palms. She smiled when I cried. She told stories no one else remembered. And she whispered my name in a way that made it mean something more than command. In waking life, she was a ghost. No painting of her remained, no necklace, no keepsake, only firewood. Old stories burned to ash. One night, in my 13th winter, I followed a group of elders as they drank near the cave wall. They didn't see me. They thought me asleep. They spoke of the old days, of firelight gatherings and songs no longer sung. And then one of them, a woman named Tika, said her name. Not loud, not proud, but enough. Naria. I froze. The name hit me like a spear between the ribs. One of the others shushed her. "Don't speak it," he hissed. "He's Mir, the boy." Tika shook her head. "He deserves to know. He deserves to forget," another growled. I slipped away before they saw me, but the name burned. Naria. It felt like flint sparking in the dark places of my soul. For the first time, I had something real, and yet it raised more questions than it answered. Why did they hide her name? Why speak of her like a curse? What did she do? What did they fear? I asked my father the next day. He hit me hard, then walked away. He didn't speak to me for a week, and when he did, it was only to say, "Dead things stay buried." But she wasn't dead to me, not anymore. I started asking around, quietly, to the old ones who still remembered. Some gave me looks of pity, some spat. But one, an old hunter named Bryn, said something I never forgot. "She was fire," he said, "too much of it. That's why they feared her, not because she broke, but because she burned." I pressed him. What did she burn? He looked at me for a long time, then whispered, "The rules." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire alone, carving lines into a bone, trying to imagine what kind of woman could scare a whole tribe even after death. Could she really have challenged the chiefs, the hunters, the traditions? Was she punished or silenced? Had she wanted something different from me? Had she loved me? Or had I been a weight too heavy to bear? I wanted to scream, but instead I sat, quiet, listening to the fire crackle, trying to hear her name in the wind, Naria. And then it happened. A dream, or maybe more. I was in the forest, walking without sound. The snow fell upward. The trees whispered in voices I couldn't understand. And then I saw her. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She only reached out her hand and touched my face. And in her eyes, dark, wide, endless, I saw everything I never knew I had been missing. Warmth, truth, a name. Not just hers, mine. I woke with tears freezing on my cheeks, not from sorrow, from recognition. Because I finally understood something no one had dared say. I wasn't just the boy who lost his mother. I was the boy they took her from. The boy they silenced by silencing her. The boy who carried a name carved in frost, waiting to be spoken aloud. And that morning, I stood at the center of camp, in front of the fire. And for the first time in my life, I spoke her name. Loud, clear, Naria. No one moved, no one breathed. But something in the fire changed. It burned brighter, hotter, like it too had been waiting. That was the day I stopped being only a hunter. That was the day I began to remember. They didn't punish me for saying her name. They didn't beat me, didn't exile me. They didn't say a word. But the silence changed. Not the heavy silence of grief, a colder one, suspicion, fear. I felt it in every glance, in the way the women stopped handing me meat, in the way the warriors left space beside me at the fire, in the way my father looked at me, like I had cracked something he spent years trying to keep buried. But I didn't flinch, because after speaking her name, I could not go back to being nameless. Not truly. I began to search, not just for stories, for proof. There had to be something, a carving, a pendant, a mark, something that told me Naria existed outside of whispers. I started with the caves, the old ones, the ones no longer used for shelter, only memory. We weren't supposed to enter them unless guided by an elder. I went alone,
Every night, after the fires died, I crept from the tents and walked past the guards. They didn't stop me. They didn't dare look me in the eyes anymore. The first cave gave me nothing, just soot, faded claw marks. The second held echoes, strange ones. I swear I heard breathing that wasn't mine. The third cave was deeper. It swallowed light. It made my torch flicker. But I found it there. Not a name, a shape, a painting. So faint it was nearly gone, but still visible. A woman standing in a field of flame. One hand stretched toward the sky, the other shielding a child. And carved beneath her feet, a spiral, broken in half. I touched it. It burned. Not with heat, with memory, with something ancient. When I closed my eyes, I could hear her voice. Not words, just music, like humming from beneath the earth. I stayed until the torch died, and then I stayed longer. When I left the cave, the stars had moved. The wind was biting, and I knew someone had followed me. He stepped from behind a tree, old Bren, the one who'd called her fire. "You found it," he said. I didn't answer. "Your father painted it," he added, "after she died." That stopped me. "What?" Bren nodded. "They made him paint it, made him mark her as a warning. But he chose the image, chose to show her protecting, not destroying. That was his rebellion." I couldn't breathe. My father honored her. Bren sighed. In his way. He was angry, lost. They said she cursed the tribe, said her ideas would tear us apart. What ideas? That strength without compassion is rot, that traditions built on fear are no better than cages. I felt the world tilt. Everything I had believed unraveled. She wasn't weak, I asked. She was the strongest woman I ever knew, Bren said, and they feared that strength. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Remember her, but not just as a ghost. Remember what she lived for, not just what she died for. Then he turned and walked away. I sat there in the snow, staring at the painting until the wind buried it again. And I knew my path had changed. I would find the rest, not just of her story, but of mine, even if it meant leaving the tribe, even if it meant breaking every rule she once burned, because the trail of her ashes still glowed in the dark, and I would follow it until I saw the fire she left behind.
The next day, I didn't join the hunt. My absence was noticed, not with words, but with glares, with the way meat was passed without my name being called, with the way the fire circle tightened just enough that I sat in its smoke instead of its warmth. Still, I didn't speak. I ate what little was mine. I watched the flames, and I listened. They spoke of storms coming early, of game moving farther south. They whispered about me, too, the boy with the wrong questions, the boy who brought his mother's shadow back. They were right. I didn't bring it back to curse them. I brought it back to see what it was made of. That night, I returned to the cave. Not to stare at the painting again. I had memorized it. I went to find more. But the cave offered nothing new, only that same stillness, that same lingering breath of heat under the cold. So I widened the search. I began following the old paths, the trails worn into the earth not by feet, but by memory. I spoke to travelers, traders, anyone who might remember a woman with fire in her blood. One day, I found an old woman named Sarah living beyond the river band, a healer, half blind, with fingers stained from roots and moss. "Neria," she said, voice like brittle leaves. "Oh yes, I remember her. Too clever, too loud." "What did she do?" I asked. She questioned why sick men were left to die alone, why widows were not allowed to speak in council, why hunters got the first bite while children sucked on bone. Did she lead?
She tried, Sarah said, until they made her stop. Did she have enemies? Only those who feared they were wrong. Sarah handed me a pouch of dried leaves. She used these for fevers, said they made the dreams clearer. I thanked her. That night, I burned the leaves, and I dreamed. In the dream, I stood in a clearing of bone-white trees. The sky above twisted with red smoke, and she was there, not as a ghost, alive, breathing. She wore no paint, no feathers, just a necklace made of small stones, and in the center, a spiral, unbroken. She looked at me, but not with sadness, with pride. "You're not me," she said, "and that's why you can finish what I began." Then she vanished in the smoke. I woke shaking, and I knew it wasn't just about finding who she was. It was about carrying it forward. I began to speak again, not to ask, to tell. To the young ones around the fire, to the women tending hides, to the old ones who pretended not to hear. I told them of Neria, how she challenged love with love, how she refused to let silence win, how she believed that strength was not in the spear, but in knowing when not to use it. Some turned away, but some listened. One girl began painting spirals on her hands. One boy began asking his mother questions at night. And one man, my father, watched me from across the fire with something almost like grief, or maybe recognition. I still didn't know what exactly had happened the night she died, but I knew this. They buried her body. They buried her name, but they never buried the things she left unburned. And I would spend my life lighting them again.
Americano. It began with a whisper, not from the tribe, but from the wind. The kind of sound that slips under furs and makes skin rise like prey sensing the shadow of wings. I was tending the edge fires, not a task given out of honor, one given to keep me away from the main circle. But I didn't mind. Fire is honest. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't lie. It burns what is dry and warms what is near. And that night, it felt like the only thing that hadn't turned its back on me. Until it spoke. Not with words, but with motion. The flames began to sway in rhythm, not to wind, not to breath, to something deeper. A beat beneath the earth, the kind of pulse you feel in your bones before you hear it in your ears. And then I smelled it. Not wood, not ash, something older. A scent of herbs I did not know, and smoke that carried memory. I stepped closer. The fire grew, and in the flames, I saw her. My mother, not in flesh, not in form, but in fragments. Her eyes, her hair pulled back with sinew, her hand raised, not in warning, but in invitation. I blinked. Gone. But something remained. A stone, small and smooth, resting in the coals. I reached in with bone tongs, lifted it. On its surface, a spiral, unbroken. I didn't sleep. Instead, I walked to the elders' circle. They still sat near the central fire, trading boasts and old fears. I held up the stone. I said, "This was in the fire." They stared. One elder scoffed. "All stones have marks." Another leaned forward. "That symbol hasn't been seen since Neria," my father finished, quietly. They went silent. I said, "She's trying to speak." "You're dreaming," one growled. "Maybe," I said, "but maybe that's how truth arrives, not with war cries, but in embers." They didn't answer, but they didn't throw me out either. The next day, I walked to the cliff where mothers leave stones for the lost. There were hundreds, piled, weathered, names carved shallow, some erased by time. I found one with no name. I took it. I carved. Not her full story, just a mark, the spiral. And I placed it on the edge. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I was not alone. Children stood behind me, each holding a small flame. Not one of them spoke, but in the silence, I felt it. The fire was no longer mine alone. It had spread, and it was listening back.
The snow came early that year, silent and mean, like a lesson no one had asked for. It buried the old trails, erased the past to the mountain pools, and made the bones of the world crack underfoot. We stopped speaking as much. The cold takes language first, then breath, then memory. But the fire spoke more. After that night by the edge flames, I stopped fearing the visions. I sought them. I fed the fire different things, bits of feather, a lock of hair I'd kept from Kyan's braid, the cracked tooth of a stag that had nearly killed me, and once the flute I had carved for her, the one she never held. The flames took them all and gave back pieces. One night, I saw her walking among trees made of smoke. Another, she was standing at the river, hand outstretched, palm covered in the same spiral, always watching, always quiet. I asked the fire, was I too late? It did not answer, so I asked myself instead. I remembered the stories others told me about her. Nerea, daughter of the storm slope, healer of bones, singer of the stones. They said she carried light where others carried knives, that even the wolves slowed down when they passed her tent. But I remembered none of it. Only a gap, a space too wide for words. I asked my father, once, what did she smell like? He grunted. What did she say the day I was born? She screamed, he said. Then he left. That was his offering, a scream and silence. But I needed more, so I followed where the fire led. The dreams became directions. Symbols burned into bark, a pattern of stones by the creek, even bird song repeating rhythmically like language I had forgotten. I wandered further, left the camp more often, walked paths no one else dared take. One morning, I crossed a ravine where no sun touched the snow, and there, wedged in a crack of black ice, was a piece of bone, carved, a name, Nerea. It wasn't the bone of an animal. I brought it back. I did not tell the elders. I wrapped it in fur, placed it in the cave where no one went, and I lit a fire of pine needles and roots she would have known. I waited, and the dream that came next did not have her face. It had her voice, singing, not in words, but in tone, in sorrow, in lullaby, and I wept, because the melody sounded like something I'd heard before, once in my first winter, when Kyan held me during a storm and hummed into my ear to stop me from crying. He had never said where he learned it. Now I knew. She had left it behind, a thread, and it had survived. Not in stories, not in stone, in sound. The song beneath the ashes. I began to hum it too, around the fires, and others listened, even my father, even the wind. But it didn't stop there. One dusk, as I traced spirals in the snow beyond the camp, a girl, no older than 8 winters, came and knelt beside me. She copied the shape, then sang the tune I had only hummed, perfectly,
I froze. "Where did you hear that?" She pointed to the fire. "It sings to me at night," she said, "the same way it sings to you." And then she ran off. I stood in the twilight, heart pounding, not from fear, from recognition. She had heard it too. The thread had passed again. What I had thought was only mine, this buried link to the mother I never knew, was not a secret, but a path. It was spreading, and not through force, through feeling, through flame. Later that night, I added wood to the fire, not pine, not oak, willow. The bark sang when it burned, a soft hiss like breath drawn in prayer, and the fire danced. Shapes moved in the shadows, not faces, but echoes of movement. My mother's hands, her stride, her stillness. I sat there until my bones were stiff and the world grew pale. I said nothing to the others. I didn't need to. The song was already making its way across the camp, one fire at a time.
It was the sound that woke me, a whistle, low and steady, like a breath drawn from between the trees. It moved the smoke, stirred the ashes, and touched my cheek like a mother's hand I never remembered. I sat up by the fire, blinking the sleep from my eyes, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. Not just the land, inside. I had drifted too far from the tribe. Days had passed. I no longer measured them by the sun, but by the way the stars changed places in the night sky. I hunted little, I ate less, and yet I was not weak. I was walking the path she once walked, and something about it made me feel filled, like the empty places inside me weren't empty anymore, just different. I followed the wind that morning. It wasn't a choice, it was instinct, as if the forest had opened a narrow mouth and whispered, "Come." I crossed the frozen stream with bare feet, feeling the ice bite and crack beneath me. The cold no longer frightened me. Pain was not the enemy, forgetting was. That day, I walked farther than I ever had, into lands the old ones warned us about, where shadows stretched long even at midday, and birds flew in silence. I found a tree bent by storm, its branches twisted like fingers grasping the sky. Beneath it, something waited. A stone, flat, smooth, warm, despite the snow around it, and carved into its surface, a spiral, etched deep. Not the same as before. This one had 3 arms. I placed my hand upon it, and I remembered. Not everything, but enough. A woman's voice singing while grinding seeds, the scent of berries warming on a rock, a hand brushing my forehead as I cried in my sleep. The wind carried her name again, Neria. I whispered it. The forest listened. That night, I built a fire there, alone, surrounded by snow and silence, under a sky veiled with smoke. I did not speak. I did not move. I simply watched the flames dance and hoped they would speak first. They did. This time, not with visions or dreams, but with memory, mine. I saw myself as a child, small, cold, frightened. And she, not a ghost, not a goddess, just a woman with tired eyes and strong hands, wrapped me in her furs, pressed me against her chest, hummed the same tune that still echoed in the camp. And I wept again, because I finally understood. I had known her. She had held me, even if for one night, even if only once. And that night had lasted inside me longer than 100 winters. She had left too soon, but not before planting something, a thread, a hum, a fire. It lived in Cayenne. It lived in me. It lived in the song, in the willow smoke, in the hands of a child who traced spirals in the snow without knowing why. She had not needed years to shape us, just one moment of being seen. That was the true mark of her. Not blood, not story, presence. I stayed by the stone until the wind stopped,
until the snow fell gently again, not like a blade, but like a blanket. And when I stood to leave, I left behind something I had carried too long, a bone carving I had made for her, clenched in my pouch for seasons. I placed it at the base of the stone and whispered, "You were here. I remember." As I walked away, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt whole. The world was still cold, the trees still whispered, the fire still burned. But now, when I looked back over my shoulder, I didn't see absence. I saw her name written in the wind, and I knew I hadn't lost her. She had waited for me to remember, and now I had.